So by now you've probably heard of a little game called Monster Hunter Wilds. A lot of you have probably heard about this game. Like a lot. Now, I don't normally do videos like this, but being a Monster Hunter veteran and fan of both Monster Hunter and Capcom for over most of my life, now I figured if I was going to do this for any game, it'd be this one. Now let me preface this, I'm not a game critic. I'm not super great at explaining my opinions in a clear and concise manner either. I'm just the guy who has played an ungodly amount of games in my lifetime and played almost every Monster Hunter since Freedom Unite on the PSP. Now, since I'll talk about both story and roster spoilers, if you are just here for an opinion on the game, game's great, performance is terrible, especially on PC. Veteran fans may fall asleep at the wheel through low rank due to a really undertuned difficulty, but high rank makes up for that in quite a few moments. Overall, game's great, I like the game. Now on to my more detailed opinions. Now let's get the elephant out of the room first and talk about the main reason this game is sitting at a mixed rating on Steam, and the only thing keeping me from recommending this game to a lot of my friends when before they couldn't get me to shut up trying to convince them to play the series. The performance. Honestly, let's not sugarcoat it. The performance, at least on PC, but consoles ain't great either, is abysmal. And quite frankly, inexcusable for a company as big and profitable as Capcom. Not to mention any game charging $70 fucking dollars, and trust me, we'll get to those microtransactions too. Now, I ran the game on a 7800 XT with a 7800 X3D and 32 gigs of RAM. A rig the benchmark said could run the game at a mix of mid to high settings. Not to mention a rig well above the recommended specs of RTX 2060 or AMD Radeon 6600 with a AMD Ryzen 3600 and 16 gigs of RAM. And back on that topic of the benchmark, the full game definitely isn't running like what the benchmark said it would. That's if the game ran at all, because for a decent amount of people with AMD GPUs, myself included, the game crashed often, anywhere between 30 minutes to an hour of gameplay. Now, I personally was able to fix this by underclocking my GPU to 80% of its current power. The Adrenaline software, which I might add is probably the weirdest fix I've ever stumbled across. However, that still leaves a subpar performance. The only way I was able to even get a mildly stable frame rate was by lowering settings to a max of mid, but mostly low. Even still, that really only helped with frame stability, not frame rate. Another problem, the only way I was able to get the performance even close to what the benchmark said was by messing with the config file and disabling volumetric fog, and changing how many cores the game uses, because apparently it only uses 4 cores at default. Now, I'm not a graphics snob by any means, but the game honestly doesn't look that much better overworld to justify how much worse the performance is. And honestly, if you add the fact that I had to lower my graphics settings quite a bit, combined with the texture streaming issues and poor frame rate, the game honestly looks worse than Rise in a lot of instances. Now, the reason for the discrepancy between the benchmark and full game is reportedly due to the game running 2 versions of DRM, which is, if true, is really scummy and misleading of Capcom, basically making the benchmark a complete lie. Add on, at the time of recording, Capcom not actually addressing the poor optimization, instead telling users to make sure their drivers are up to date, the PC equivalent of, have you tried turning it on and off again? And this whole situation has honestly damaged not only my opinion of Capcom, but interest in future Capcom games. Now, taking a side note from strictly complaining about the game, also seeing a pretty vocal minority of community members and content creators in the Monster Hunter spaces defend the poor optimization and call people voicing their complaints about it whiny or fake fans is honestly wild. Like, I think these people wanted more games to come out poorly optimized and broken by the way they were talking, but I digress. Like I said, this is a vocal minority and not at all representative of the community as a whole. Probably even less worth my time, but seeing it has honestly chapped my ass a bit, and I couldn't not say so. Regardless, performance is honestly my only major complaint about the game so far, so let's talk about something more positive. Now, I'm going to preface this by saying when World first came out, I honestly was really disappointed by a lot of that game's newcomer roster. Off the top of my head, there were only really 2 newcomers I still liked from World, Nergigante and Dodogama. Now, Iceborne alleviated this a bit, but it was still a problem I had that I felt I should share before I say this game's roster of newcomers are all fucking bangers. Raidao is my new favorite monster, only seconded by Tigrex. Capcom, please release that plushie soon. Arkveld is a very interesting design. Zhu-Wu looks like a Bloodborne monster. New Udra is so good it honestly feels like Capcom realized they haven't had a cephalopod and wanted to make up for lost time. The Fire Chicken is probably my new favorite low threat level early monster. Jindahad is so cool and a way better raid style fight than Zora Magdaros and World. And even the monster types I don't tend to care about, like monkeys and spiders, have peak designs like Angelican and La Barain. This game also has a wide variety of monster variants too, with the introduction of Guardians, an interesting subclass monster that are basically man-made immortal homunculus versions of existing extinct monsters, which also have really cool lore implications and possibilities for monster design. As well as both frenzied and tempered monsters coming, you have a pretty wide variety, even outside of the regular roster. Now please Capcom, give me tempered, frenzied Guardian Jindahad. However, I have to say, as peak as the new coming roster is, while typing out this script, I realized the returning roster is honestly a bit odd and a little bit of a letdown. Obviously you have both Wraths, because honestly, them not being in a Monster Hunter game would be like Pokemon not having a Pikachu. And obviously you can't have Frenzy without Gormagala. Plus he's a fan favorite. And Yin Kut-Ku and Gypsyros are both picks that I feel had to show up at some point sooner than later. So okay. Now look, this is the part where I get really subjective, but what is with the other monsters in this roster? Did we really need 3 monkeys and none of them be Quetzalcoatl or Rajang? Like, look, I may be a bit biased against Bo Raicho here and this other fucking guy from my time with Freedom Unite. But like, I feel you could have replaced both of these guys and just left Angelican and be fine on monkey monsters. The rest of these guys are fine, I guess. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of Bounce Central, but I get why he's here. I guess. But I feel like the returning monster roster is missing a lot of the sauce the newcomers have. Also, where the hell are the Elder Dragons? And no, reclassifying Gormagala as a demi-elder doesn't count. Like, I get that the community was kind of fatigued by Kushala, Teostra, and Lunestra. Like, even I'd probably give a kidney to never have to hunt a Teostra again. But come on, no Elder Dragons? Like, what about my boy Yamasukami? What about Kirin, Chameleos, I don't know how to pronounce his name properly, so I'm gonna butcher this. The guy from Generations Ultimate. Hell, what about the whole Frontier and Online roster of elders that's basically gone untouched? What about Miogaluna? All jokes aside, while the returning roster definitely feels lacking, obviously they're going to add more monsters down the road. Hell, we already have Mizutsune and possibly one other monster coming early April. And if the leaks are to be believed, Legirocris, Seregios, Zenogre, and Gogmazios are all in the pipeline. So obviously the returning roster is going to be padded out pretty well between content updates and the inevitable G-Rank expansion. Not to mention, you can't have Gore without Shiguru, so I'm not really worried, but like, wow. The newcomers took all the... Historically speaking, the story of Monster Hunter games has always been kind of only really picking up with World, and even then, that story was more just a background to you being in this new world. This story, however, is center stage for better or for worse. We'll get there. Overall, I gotta say, when taken on its own, I actually really liked the story. The focus on the ancient civilization and illusions and repurposing of cut ideas from the first game, like Zoshia, the final boss of the game, being essentially what the Eagle Dragon weapons was conceived as, makes the story and future implications of said story intriguing for a longtime fan like me. I'm very excited to see where this story goes in the G-Rank expansion. The story also kind of surprisingly goes into some dark areas at times, which was honestly a bit of a double take moment for me. If I had to describe the story to somebody, it's kind of like Monster Hunter meets Jurassic Park with a sprinkle of Lovecraftian horror in there. Now, as much as I hate doing this, like the roster, while the story is good, there are still flaws. The biggest of those flaws being how much the story gets in the way of the gameplay. From the Sony first-party staple of fake walk-and-talk gameplay sections that could honestly have just been a cutscene, and elements where the game feels like it just refuses to take you off the leash. And on the topic of leashes, while I enjoy the story detail of the Hunters Guild having to approve monster hunts, what I don't like is me on my own time being not in a story mission, being nagged that you don't have approval to hunt this monster when fighting monsters I haven't reached the story hunt for yet. Like, it's one thing that I don't get any quest rewards for hunting said monster, and it honestly wouldn't bother me if the game said it once and moved on, but the nagging was enough to make me just not want to hunt any monster outside of the story till I finished the main story. And then there's this fucker. While the writing of the game is overall completely serviceable, at worst, one part where the game really loses me is the way Nata is written. This kid seems to flip-flop at any given point simply to be an annoying shit, going from, "Oh, you call yourself a hunter? Why don't you kill Arkfeld and ignore the fact that we clearly don't know enough about it, and it would probably kill us all if you got its attention? I'm Nata. I'm a dumbass." To right at the moment it's revealed that Arkfeld is basically a monster serial killer, going, "No, you can't kill Arkfeld. He's just like me for real." Like, I honestly don't get the writing decisions for Nata. And it comes off more like a whiny brat than I think the writers intended. So in closing, replace Nata with Jeff Goldblum and the story would be perfect. Now on to the difficulty and mechanics. Another point of contention in the community is the difficulty or lack thereof, particularly in low rank. And yes, the game is definitely the easiest Monster Hunter game, to the point it feels like it's kinda throwing off the gameplay loop a bit, especially in low rank, to the point that in low rank I could not break a monster I was farming's parts before they died, and spent way more time just hoping to get the parts I needed with the capture. Now, that's not to say that low rank has absolutely no challenge. There were definitely some fights that came out of nowhere and forced me to lock in. Guardian Doshagama, Jin Dahad, and especially Ray Dao, for instance. But overall, I definitely felt like I kind of breezed through low rank, even though I played my story entirely solo. However, high rank definitely upped the challenge to be more in line with what I'd expect from Monster Hunter with the rate. I was carting hunts going from maybe a handful of times and to almost half the time. Now, while I understand Capcom's approach, they want to bring in new players, obviously, but I feel like this is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, I don't believe the series difficulty was what was keeping people away as much as it was the obtuseness and things such as breakable pickaxes, lack of camp restocking, and the paintball system in the older generations. I understand the goal, but I could just as easily see the lack of early game challenge just as easily having the opposite effect on new players, with players getting bored with how easy monsters go down and bouncing off the game that way, or vice versa, being a player enjoying their time breezing through without a real gradual challenge to help them learn the game, then hitting a wall when they reach high rank and bouncing off then, right at the traditionally best part of Monster Hunter games. Now, like I said, high rank fixed pretty much all of this. At the time of writing this, Tempered Gormagala is absolutely stomping me, and Tempered Ray Dao feels like a clash with Godzilla. I would, however, suggest for veteran players looking to be challenged, just sticking with the base armor through low rank, and only using monster parts for weapons. In closing on the difficulty, I think that overall the game could definitely use a bit of retuning, because the lack of difficulty feels like it's at a detriment to the game and the personality of the monsters. Outside of the difficulty, however, the game kind of nails everything mechanically for the most part. Every weapon feels great, and while I do occasionally find myself missing some of the more stylized and outlandish parts of the movesets from previous games, every weapon feels solid and fun. Wilds introduces a new mechanic with the focus and wounding system, which feels good and with a bit of tuning should definitely be a mainstay in the series. Now, I add the caveat of tuning because it is not without its tiny bit of jank. For instance, there are many moments where I found the focus mode crosshair doesn't line up with where the sword would actually hit, and there was no real indicator of if it was off or not. And I took quite a bit of avoidable damage trying to break a wound that the game just didn't seem to want to hit. On top of that, with my limited time with multiplayer, especially with the full squad, the wound breaking just destroys monsters, stun locking them into oblivion, which definitely doesn't help my feelings on the difficulty. But either way, the Sacred is a great evolution of the Palamute from Rise, which also allows you to have access to 2 weapons at all times, which for someone like me who really likes 2 different weapons, the longsword and the gun lance, is great. I imagine someone who really likes exploring elements would also really like this added accessibility. However, a weird issue I found with the Sacred is despite turning off all of the game's auto navigation as much as it would allow, sometimes the game would just randomly decide to auto run the Sacred to the closest monster, which wouldn't be too terrible, except for one, it happens a lot when I'm trying to just chill and scroll through my menus, and two, the Sacred's navigation leaves a lot to be desired. I ran into multiple points where the Sacred kind of just gets lost and runs back and forth, but that kind of just feels like an evolution of the Scout Flies just leading you wherever they want in the world. Alma acting as a mobile quest board being with you at all times is also very cool. However, I do kind of wish there was a traditional quest board in each camp, but that's more of a nitpick. Now here's where I complain about Capcom directly. Historically speaking, I haven't really been super bothered by Capcom's microtransaction strategy, like the Red Orbs in DMC5 for example, because it kind of felt just like time savers for people who had more money than time, and never felt like locking a basic feature behind a paywall. However, that is exactly what they are doing with the character and Palico edit vouchers. Locking character editing behind a paywall is bullshit, Capcom, especially with the game's current set of issues. In closing, while yes, the game is good and is so close to being my favorite Monster Hunter game ever, there are unfortunately a couple of choices and issues that prevent it from being there quite yet. That being said, if Capcom fixes the performance, the title update monsters are great, the inevitable G-Rank expansion is packed and challenging, then this game will probably dethrone my current favorite, Generations Ultimate. And I will definitely go door to door telling all my friends about this game, just like I did with previous games. But yeah, that's my thoughts on the game. I don't normally do videos like this because I feel like I suck at them, so if you stuck around, I appreciate you. If you are currently playing Wilds, let me know how you feel about it. Likes, dislikes, first Monster Hunter, favorite monster that's not in Wilds. And I'll catch y'all later.